Hey everyone, welcome to Lesson 1. Today we're jumping into the fundamentals of cybersecurity, but specifically how they apply to Linux. Whether you're brand new to Linux or already comfortable with the terminal, we're going to explore why Linux is such a big deal in cybersecurity, how it differs from other systems, and what kinds of threats we need to protect against. Think of this lesson as your entry point into building safer, more secure systems using one of the most powerful tools out there. Our goal today is threefold. First, we'll break down the big cybersecurity principles, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and see how they play out in real Linux environments. Then we'll take a look at common threats like privilege escalation and malware, what they are, how they happen, and how to recognize them. And finally, we'll talk about what you can do to secure a Linux system using tools like permissions, encryption, and firewalls. By the end, you'll have a solid foundation to build on. Before we dive into the details, let's talk about why Linux matters in cybersecurity. Linux is widely used in security-focused roles. Think penetration testing, system monitoring, and hardening, because it's lightweight, fast, and highly customizable. Unlike proprietary systems, Linux gives you full control over its configuration. And that's important when you're trying to lock down a system from threats. Whether you're scanning networks with tools like Nmap or hardening a server, chances are you're doing it on Linux. What sets Linux apart from Windows or Mac OS? The biggest thing is that it's open source. That means anyone can look at the code, modify it, or contribute to its development. This creates a community-driven ecosystem and gives users total control. With Linux, you're not boxed in by vendor restrictions. You can build a system that fits your exact needs, securely and efficiently. That level of flexibility is gold in the cybersecurity world. Now let's set the stage with some core principles. These apply to any system, but we'll be looking at them with a Linux lens. The big three are confidentiality, integrity, and availability, often called the CIA triad. These are like the North Star for cybersecurity, helping guide how we protect systems and data from harm. So what do these mean in practice? Confidentiality is all about keeping information private. Only people with the right permissions should see sensitive data. Integrity means the data hasn't been tampered with. It's accurate and trustworthy. And availability? That ensures the system and information are up and running when you need them, even during an attack or hardware failure. In Linux, these ideas show up everywhere, from file permissions to system uptime. Even though Linux is powerful and secure by design, it's not bulletproof. Common vulnerabilities include things like misconfigured services, outdated software, or malware infections. And once attackers find these cracks, they can use them to get deeper into the system, often escalating their privileges or stealing data. Privilege escalation is one of the top ways attackers gain more control. Let's say a hacker gets access to a basic user account. If the system's misconfigured, maybe it has a file with the wrong SUID settings or a service running as root, they can exploit that and give themselves admin privileges. From there, they can do almost anything, which makes proper configuration so critical. The Linux kernel is the heart of the OS, and if there's a bug in it, like a buffer, overflow, or race condition, it can be a goldmine for attackers. Exploiting the kernel gives them the highest level of access. That's why it's so important to keep your kernel up to date and monitor security advisories closely. Linux isn't immune to malware. Sure, it's less common than on Windows, but it definitely exists. Rootkits, Trojans, worms. These can sneak in through vulnerable software or even phishing emails. Once inside, they can open backdoors, steal files, or create zombie systems for botnets. That's why good cyber hygiene matters, even on Linux. Two growing threats are ransomware and cryptojacking. Ransomware locks you out of your files until you pay, usually in cryptocurrency, and can cripple organizations. Cryptojacking, on the other hand, uses your computer's resources without your knowledge to mine crypto. It may not destroy your files, but it can slow systems to a crawl and drain your electricity bill. One of the most overlooked security risks in Linux, really in any system, is weak or default configurations. It's like leaving your front door unlocked. Sure, the house might look secure from the outside, but if you haven't changed the factory settings, an attacker might walk right in. Let's break it down. First, there's default permissions. These are often too open right out of the box. For example, a folder that all users can read and write to. That's asking for trouble. If one user downloads malware, it could spread through those shared permissions like wildfire. Next up is excessive permissions, like giving write access to files that don't need it, or letting regular users execute scripts meant only for admins. It's like giving every employee a key to the server room. It's just not necessary, and it dramatically increases the risk of internal or accidental damage. Then there's unpatched software. Developers are constantly fixing bugs and security holes in software. But if you don't apply those updates, your system stays vulnerable. It's kind of like ignoring a recall on your car's brakes. Sooner or later, it's going to cause a problem. In short, weak configurations don't always look dangerous, but they quietly create opportunities for attackers. So part of securing a Linux system is reviewing your setup, every setting, every permission, and making sure you're not unintentionally leaving the door open. So how do we fix that? Start with the basics. Harden your system by removing what you don't need, manage file access properly, and encrypt important data. These small steps add up to a big security improvement. When we talk about system hardening, we're talking about shrinking the attack surface, basically reducing all the ways an attacker could get in. Think of your system like a house. The more windows and doors it has, the more chances someone has to break in. Hardening means closing and locking as many of those as possible. First up, removing unnecessary packages. If a piece of software isn't essential to your system's function, it shouldn't be there. Unused applications, especially ones that connect to the internet, can contain vulnerabilities, even if you're not actively using them. The less software installed, the fewer opportunities an attacker has. Next, disabling unnecessary services. Linux systems often have background services running that you might not even be aware of, like old network daemons, print services, or database processes. If you're not using them, turn them off. Commands like systemctl and service help you check what's running and disable what you don't need. And don't forget about removing temporary files. These might sound harmless, but they can store session data, authentication tokens, or command histories. Basically breadcrumbs for attackers. Regularly clearing out /tmp log files and cache directories can help limit exposure. The bottom line? A hardened system is a clean, minimal one, only running what's necessary and nothing more. That's the foundation of good Linux security. One of the easiest ways to tighten your system's security is by managing who can access what, through file permissions and ownership. It might seem simple, but getting this right can block a lot of potential attacks. The golden rule here is, start from zero. That means giving no one access to a file by default, and then gradually granting permissions only where they're absolutely needed. It's like building a need-to-know system for your files. If someone doesn't need access, they don't get it. Every file and directory in Linux has 3 sets of permissions: user, group, and others. And for each of those, you control read, write, and execute access. It's super granular, which is great for security. For example, a system log might be readable by a group, but readable only by root. That way, no unauthorized users can alter it. Ownership is just as important. Every file has a specific user and group tied to it. If you're not assigning those carefully, users might inherit access to files they shouldn't touch. When permissions are too loose, attackers can read sensitive config files, inject malicious code, or even overwrite system binaries. By enforcing strict ownership and using the principle of least privilege, you make it much harder for intruders to move around in your system. Linux gives you powerful tools to manage this. Use chmod to set who can read, write, or execute files. Use chown to assign file ownership and chgrp to manage group access. Mastering these commands gives you tight control over who can access what. Top of form, bottom of form. Even with the best file permissions in place, there's still one more layer you should consider. File encryption. Think of it as your last line of defense. If someone manages to get past your firewall or access your system, encryption ensures that what they find is unreadable without the right key. In Linux, encryption is surprisingly accessible. You've got 2 main tools to work with here: GPG and MCRYPT. Both let you lock down files so that they require a passphrase to open, kind of like putting your documents in a safe that only you have the combination to. Let's start with GPG, which stands for GNU Privacy Guard. It uses strong encryption algorithms and is widely trusted in the cybersecurity community. To encrypt a file, you just run gpg-c file name, and it saves a new version of the file with a .gpg extension. When someone tries to open it, they'll be prompted for the password. No password, no access. Then there's Macrypt, which also offers strong encryption but gives you more flexibility with choosing algorithms. You can check out available options by typing emacrypt-list. To encrypt, you'd use something like emacrypt-algorithm name-file name, and it outputs a .nc file. That's your encrypted version. Now, one thing to remember, encryption only works if you keep your passwords secure. If someone gets your encryption key or passphrase, they've got the keys to the kingdom. So treat those just like you would your root password. Don't store them in plain text, and definitely don't share them. Using encryption is a smart move for securing sensitive files, like config files, user data, or even backup archives. It's not just about privacy, it's about control. Even if someone steals the file, they can't read it without your say-so. A firewall acts like a security checkpoint. It decides which traffic gets through and which doesn't, based on rules you define. Linux has some great tools for this: iptables, nftables, and firewall, each offering different levels of control and usability. Now that we've covered what a Linux firewall is and why it's important, let's talk about the tools you'll actually use to manage one. Linux gives you several options, and each has its strengths depending on your comfort level and what kind of system you're working with. Let's start with the classic iptables. This has been the go-to firewall tool in Linux for a long time. It's powerful and flexible, but the syntax can be a bit complex, especially if you're new to command line work. With iptables, you define rules for how the system handles network traffic, what gets allowed, what gets blocked, and under what conditions. It's a bit like building a list of who can knock on your door and when. Next is nftables, the modern replacement for iptables. It was designed to simplify things, and honestly, it does a great job. With nftables, you can create cleaner, more organized rules. It supports both IPv4 and IPv6 in one rule set, so you don't have to duplicate your work. Plus, it's more efficient and easier to maintain, especially for large or complex systems. Then we have UFW, which stands for Uncomplicated Firewall, and it lives up to the name. It's a simpler, more beginner-friendly interface that sits on top of iptables. It's great if you're using Ubuntu or just want something that's quick and easy to manage without diving into long command chains. You can do things like allow or deny ports with just one line. And finally, there's Firewall, which takes a dynamic, zone-based approach to managing traffic. This one's especially useful for Red Hat or CentOS users. It lets you define zones like home, work, or public, and apply different rules depending on where your system is connected. You don't have to restart the firewall every time you make a change, which is super convenient for managing live systems. So to sum it up, iptables is the old-school workhorse, nftables is the cleaner, modern upgrade, UFW is the quick and easy option, and Firewall gives you flexibility and dynamic control. Knowing which tool fits your needs is half the battle, and the good news is you really can't go wrong with any of them once you understand how they work. So you might be wondering, if iptables has been around forever and works fine, why switch to nftables? Great question. The short answer is, it's just better designed for today's networks. nftables was introduced as a modern replacement for iptables, and it's built to fix a lot of the pain points that admins have dealt with for years. First off, it has a unified syntax. That means you can write rules for both IPv4 and IPv6 in one place. With iptables, you'd have to manage two separate rule sets, which is not only more work, it also opens the door for errors or inconsistencies. Another big advantage is simplified rule management. nftables uses tables and chains, but in a cleaner, more logical structure. This makes your configurations easier to read and maintain. Instead of long repetitive rules, you can use maps, sets, and counters to organize traffic control much more efficiently. It's like upgrading from a flip phone to a smartphone. It just does more with less effort. Then there's performance and scalability. NFTables uses a just-in-time compiler that talks directly to the kernel, which means it can process packets faster and handle more complex traffic scenarios without slowing your system down. If you're running a high-traffic server or a complex firewall setup, this is a huge win. And let's not forget about scripting and automation. Because of its structured syntax and better error handling, NFTables is easier to integrate with automation tools or shell scripts, something that's becoming more and more important in modern DevSecOps workflows. So bottom line, migrating to NFTables makes your firewall configuration cleaner, more powerful, and more future-proof. If you're setting up a system from scratch or maintaining something that needs to scale, it's worth the switch. It's not just a new tool, it's a better foundation for secure networking in Linux. Here we can compare how the syntax looks. IP-tables can feel a bit clunky, while NFTables is cleaner and more flexible. But the real takeaway is this. Whichever tool you use, knowing how to define strong firewall rules is key to protecting your system. Firewalled offers a more visual, flexible approach to firewall management. You can define zones and services without restarting anything. And if you prefer a GUI, Firewall Manager gives you a graphical interface to handle firewall tasks without touching the command. To sum it up, Linux is a cybersecurity powerhouse. It's customizable, open, and packed with tools that let you build secure environments. Whether you're testing networks, monitoring logs, or defending a system, Linux gives you the control to do it right. We've covered a lot: threats, tools, techniques. Just remember, good security is proactive. Stay on top of updates, configure systems carefully, and use the tools you've learned about here. With a little vigilance, you can build a system that's both powerful and secure.